Doing great. I like it. I like it. So my name is Jorge Gama, and I am the co-founder of Mending Clinic. It's a private practice in Arlington, and we have an advanced outpatient program. And I'm the one that deals with the families that come in, so I work day in and day out. So when Vicki reached out to me about relationships and recovery, I was like, oh, yeah, that's right up our alley and what we work with. So thank you all for inviting me to be here. I really, really appreciate it. I think this is so important for us to stay educated and you did a fantastic job on a very difficult subject that she was talking about. So this is fantastic. I love that we're bringing this. So just real quick, I tend to talk a lot and I'm pretty long-winded. So I need somebody at some point when we get closer to 4 to give me like a 5-minute, heads up, okay? Because if I'm on the second slide by then, I become a Baptist preacher, and I apologize for that, but it may happen. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so one of the things that we're looking at with families right now is the different generations that we're working with. And so, we look at the traditionalist, baby boomers, Generation X, Generation Y, and then the current generation that really isn't named yet. And so we think about some of the things that are going on in our current situation. Angel talked about immigration. With the immigration going on right now, with the borders and everything right now, this is shaping the way that the kids see life, the lens that they're looking at their situations day to day. But just to give you a quick things that happened during those times, so during the traditionalists, born before 1946, we're looking at World War I and World War II, and they're also looking at prohibition during this time. So that's going to shape the way that they look at resources. It's going to shape the way that they look at throwing things away or keeping things or recycling them. When we look at the baby boomers between 1946 and 1964, we're looking at the end of World War II, so fathers are coming back into the home, and we know that while fathers were out, the women were doing the jobs that were done by the fathers before, so there's a change there. The Korean War, Vietnam War, there's a draft, and then there's a civil rights movement that's going on during this time. So when we look at Generation X, born between 1965 and 1981, we're looking at the war on drugs, started during this time. We're looking at the AIDS, and we're looking at Gulf War. So there's these things that they're seeing on the news that the kids are seeing as they're growing up, seeing these things. We'll look at Generation Y between 1982 and 1994, and those are the 20-something-year-olds that we see now that we look at, the millennials. And so during their time was the first mass shooting, video games exploded, and 9/11 happened. Right, and I don't know about you guys, but I remember I was 21. I was about to turn 21 when 9/11 happened, and I remember that I was in my bed asleep when my phone started ringing. I was like, what in the world is going on? And my friends were like, did you see what happened? Did you see what happened? So you go up to that. So that's imprinted in my brain. We're talking about, this was 9/11. It's not, obviously not now. It wasn't last week. It wasn't a month ago. But it's imprinted in my brain. And so that just shaped the way that we move. So the current generation, the things that are going on now, whether they realize it or not, they're getting shaped. So one of the things that I think is really important for us to keep in mind is that our brain has two ways of developing. It's got developing with a purpose and developing without a purpose. And so let's see if you guys can help me with this. See if you can finish this off with me. Here's a story. Beautiful. Okay, how about this one? Ricky, I'm home. Okay, perfect. So, did you guys sit in front of the TV and say, okay, I have to remember this because in 2018, Jorge's going to ask me at the TAAP conference for this song? No. That's conditioning without a purpose or without a reason. We look at it over and over and over, and it conditions us. Conditioning with a reason is us picking and choosing exactly what we want to put in our brain in the way that we want to conceptualize what we're learning. That takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of energy. Okay? And if you have any questions at any time, please don't hesitate to ask questions. Okay. So when we look at these different generations, I can get into the vernacular of each generation, I can get into the thought process, I can get into, money saving versus credit card debt. But really, I'd like to get down to the core that each generation or each one of us is really asking. Is, do you care for me? Can you help me? And can I trust you? And so when people are coming into your office, maybe not the client, but the family that has been working with this client and has been trying to keep them sober, or has been trying to keep them, out of a psychiatric hospital, this is what they're really looking for. These are the questions that they're implicitly asking, and if we can help answer these questions through talking to them, through asking a lot of questions, through really dissecting what's going on and reminding that in front of us, reminding ourselves that in front of us is another human being, then we can make that connection. So we get into other things like looking at each other in the eyes, we look at body posture, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But it's really answering these questions for them. And it's just the way that you pay attention to them that helps them understand this.
A very quick question. So these three major questions do apply to the previous slide, no matter which generation. Generation X, Generation Y, Generation
Yes.
Millennial.
Yes.
It applies to...
It applies to all of them, yes. Because these are implicit questions that they're asking. Now, how you apply them may be different. And so if we look at a millennial wants to connect first, so kind of joke around or have a good time, and then trust you before they give you this information. But if you look at somebody, that's maybe Generation X, they kind of want the facts. Like, just tell me what it is, right? And so how you approach them answers these questions. So you have to know your audience. So good question. So face-to-face communication. So words account for 7% of what we believe. Tone of voice accounts for 38% of what we believe. And body language is the 55%. So if somebody's talking to you and you're like this, you're like, yeah, I'm okay, I'm not mad. What makes you think I'm mad? Well, what? Right? You're going to look at that and go, whoa, dude's high-strung. Grandmother high-strung anyways, but you know what I mean. And so looking at words don't really have that much weight. Right? Have you heard, your action speaks so loud I can hear what you're saying? And so really the tone of voice and the body language, and the body language is the biggest one. Right? Really being open, being able to talk to them. If you're, sideways to them, you look closed off, or you feel closed off, and if you're like this, again, you're a little defensive, and if you're like this, you're protecting yourself. And so there's these things that we have to take into consideration when we're talking to families to be able to connect with them. So there's 4 levels of connection. There's visual, intellectual, emotional, and verbally. I think visually is one of the difficult ones. Can you use your phone real quick?
Sure. Oh, it's not working.
Oh, that's okay. I don't need it to work. I just got to borrow it real quick.
Tammy's.
Oh, Tammy and Brian. So visually, if you're ever in with a client or you're doing an assessment and you do this, at that point, there's a mistrust that happens, right? Or if your phone is in your pocket and it starts vibrating, right now sometimes it oh, I'm so sorry, I'm going to turn it off. Make sure you silence it and put it away. Because that visual, you're completely distracted. And when you look at the research, I don't remember the exact number, but it takes, I think it's between 7 to 10 minutes, even up to 15 minutes, to get back refocused. So when you're talking about working, let's say in a 50-minute session with a client, and your phone goes off or you check your phone, we're talking about that's like 1/4 of the time almost is taken up refocusing. So it's really, really important to visually be aware. Eye contact is very, very important for most people. Go ahead.
I have a question about note taking. I've worked with someone before who took notes on his iPad. And for me, I was just like blown away that he did that, because I was like, I would assume you're on Facebook right now instead of listening or something like that. But a lot of people I'm seeing are using iPads and things like that to take session notes. What's your opinion on, handwritten notes or no notes until after, or what?
Yeah, let's take a poll first. So who does handwritten notes during their sessions or while they're talking? Okay, who does them after?
few key points, like maybe one of the things I want to remind myself, but not like a full.
Okay, yeah. So I think it's setting expectation, managing expectations. So it's asking the client how they would feel, right? And so if your style is you need to jot down some notes, maybe it's letting them know that, hey, I just gotta write some stuff down, that way I don't forget, right? Or even asking them, would it be okay if I take notes during the session? Sometimes they'll tell you yes, and then you come back and say, okay, did you feel all right? Did you feel connected after we were done? Well, it was kind of distracting because I heard the clicking on the computer, or it was kind of distracting because you were focused, on writing, as opposed to focus with me. So it's really helping them take charge of that. So intellectually, you need to know your subject and yourself. And really knowing yourself is more important. Because we talk about the microaggressions, we talk about reactions. And so if we don't really know ourselves, then we start showing that to the clients, and they pick up on it very, very quickly. The people around us pick up on it very quickly. So we have to know our limitations. We have to know where we're strong and where we're not when we're going into talking to somebody about where they're at in that moment. Because some things can trigger us. So when you hear something that's traumatic, or you hear a very strong story. So I do immigration evaluations. And so what I do is I talk to the person that is the resident or that is legally here, talk about the non-resident and how it would affect them. And so as you're talking to them, you hear their backstory, you hear the traumas that they've had, where they're from. You also hear, about rape, you hear about, being abused. And so if you don't know yourself and you're not accustomed to that, doing this can really shut somebody down, right? But also doing this can shut them down as well. And so you have to know yourself. You have to be very aware that visual again, and the intellectual and the emotional, where you're at. And it's okay to say, this is really tough. Like, this is really hard. I need to, maybe catch my breath a little bit. Let's keep moving forward, but I gotta catch my breath, right? Because that's gonna help you settle down. It's gonna help the clients settle down when you're working with them. Or with the families. When you have families that come in and they're breaking down because their son or daughter they feel like they're in their last step before killing themselves or before overdosing, it's really regulating yourself to help them regulate as well. So client communication requires energy. You have to know yourself, know about who you are talking to, be patient and slow down, be selfless and giving. Clarity requires stamina. So how do you get this one answered? Ask questions. That's right. In 30, I like to think that we should be asking about 4 questions per statement or opinion or advice that we're giving. At least 4.
Can you repeat that?
So when you're talking to a client, we should be asking probably at least 4 questions before we give an opinion, a statement, or advice. We should be asking more questions than just 1 or 2. Because what happens is it may give you a part of the information. It may give you, just what they're seeing. But if you ask more questions, you'll be able to get a broader picture of what's going on. But if you jump in and you start giving them guidance or start saying, hey, this is what we have to do, then you're doing that when you have the least amount of information. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right, tell me what you're
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about motivational interview. They better be doing a lot more talking than me as their therapist, that's for sure.
Yep. That's
Or
exactly
I'm not doing them justice.
Yep. That's exactly right. And that's what I'm saying, at least 4 questions, right, before you ask that, before you start giving advice. And so when we work with the families that come in, we get a lot of clients. So we're primarily mental health based, and so very suicidal, have a chronic history of suicidal or overdosing, self-injury, those kind of behaviors. And so one of the things that we work with the families through the program is having a code word. So having some kind of a safe word with the identified client and the rest of the family. Because sometimes it's really hard for the clients to say, I want to kill myself, or I don't want to live anymore. It's just, they shut it down. So having a code word is really opens up those levels of communication. So I remember a family we were working with, we ended up figuring out that for this particular person, Oklahoma was very traumatic for them. And so what they would say is, I'm headed towards Oklahoma. So the family knew, okay, there's starting to become an escalation going on here with the suicidal ideations, with the depression, with the anxiety, and they don't necessarily have to say, hey, I'm having thoughts of killing myself. So that helps the family then support before they have to take them to the hospital, trying to prevent hospitalizations. One of the interesting things, and this is, I'm not saying it's like this across the board, but typically, men's communication is we shut down first before we communicate. So something happens and we shove it down, we stuff it, and then we say, I got this, I can do this on my own, and then we communicate. So it's important to know that when you're working, with a male client, that a lot of times we have to overcome that. We have to work with them to help them not shut down. Sometimes they'll shut down, and like Angel was talking about, we just have to say, hey, you know what, like I notice you're shutting down, or I feel like you're shutting down, can you tell me what's going on? So we know that women typically do this, right? They want to talk, they want to connect. And so if we miss that, if we have somebody that's in our session and is talking and they're kind of rambling on, we have to take a step back and try to figure out, okay, what are they really trying to say? What are they really trying to get to? And that's where asking those questions is very important, to try to create that guide, to create that path to help them get out what they're trying to get out. Be selfless in giving. This has to be within certain parameters and boundaries, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go down the road, because if we become too selfless and we give too much, we burn out. We have compassion fatigue. There's these things that happen. And so you have to keep in mind that if you're not taking care of yourself, then you're not going to be at 100% for your client. And that's something that's very, very important. And when you're dealing with a family that's had their family member that's been just at the brink of dying for the past 17 years, you don't want to go in there 50% ready. You want to go in there 90 to 95%. 100 would be perfect, but let's be honest, with life hits and we have kids and work and things we have to do, it's really, really, really draining on us. So being able to recharge and know, again, that selfless, that there are limits is very important. So, these are ways that we sabotage communication. Assumptions, arrogance, indifference, and control. There was a study done about people going into interviews, and what they did was they hooked them up to a biofeedback machine. They had their fingers, they had everything wired, and they had people talking to them. And they said that when the interviewer was indifferent was when physiologically the participants reacted the most. So externally they were composed and they were talking to them and they were giving them great answers, but internally, their internals were going crazy. And so that indifference, that blank look, that blank stare could create some sabotage in our communication, could really put people off. And so control is looking at, and we'll get into this in just a little bit more, control is a natural thing that we do, okay? And I'll get into that in just a second. So when we look at clear communication, this is kind of what I think of, right? We have a foundation that's been set, right? We have the walls that we're putting up, we have the beams that we're putting up when they're supposed to be up there. Because if these beams aren't up and everything else isn't where it's supposed to be, that second floor is going to come up. And so this is what clear communication looks like without it being sabotaged. Now, if you don't have clear communication at a site like this, you might end up with a house like this. That might not be what you're looking for. And so, it's just... Okay, so what is a boundary? You guys have an idea. What's a boundary?
Limit?
A limit?
A line you won't cross.
Space,
A line that you won't cross.
line that you won't cross.
Did you point at me?
Yeah.
Oh, protecting yourself?
Protecting yourself. Okay, I like that. Very, very good answers. I like that a lot. So boundaries are property line. That's what it boils down to, is a property line. So when you think about where you live, if you live in an apartment, then your walls are that property line. If you have a house with a yard, then typically a fence is a property line. And so that's what we're looking at. When we're looking at people that we're working with the families, one of the things that I see very little of are these boundaries. So I start talking to the families and I say, okay, so how are they getting the alcohol, or how are they getting the drugs? Well, I don't know. Okay. So where do they live? Well, they have their own apartment. Well, who's paying for their apartment? Well, we are. Okay. So how are they paying their car? Well, we're paying for it. So how are they buying food? Well, we're buying it. So how are they getting their drugs? I don't know. Okay. Okay. There's some boundary issues here, right? So the identified client is thinking, I don't have a problem. What are you getting? I got my car, I got my rent. That's exactly right. I got food, I got everything I want. You know, there's a big party coming up, and so I have my credit card. Where it's all good. And so looking at boundaries, it's a property line. And so these are the three things that we have to keep in mind when we're enforcing our boundaries. So they define ownership, they define who controls it, and they define who to hold responsible. And so there's two levels of responsibility, right? There's my responsibility, and then there's a line of demarcation, and there's your responsibility. And the problem happens when we start taking on other people's responsibilities. We make them our own. That's when we don't understand who to hold responsible. So looking at these, it's important to remember that no is a complete sentence. No is a complete sentence. I'm going to repeat that. No is a complete sentence. Because here's what happens. A lot of people struggle with boundaries, right? A lot of people struggle with not wanting to hurt other people's feelings. But that's our own filter, right? That's us putting that already on them. It's putting a responsibility on them that they don't deserve, want, or need, right? And so, and by putting the responsibility on them, then we take ownership over them. And that's not what we want to do. And so, looking at when you're talking to somebody that knows a complete sentence, at the moment that you start giving excuses or reasons or this, all you're doing is giving them ammunition to throw back at you to either manipulate or to get their way. That's what you're doing. And so, no as a complete sentence is very important. So, the other thing is that with boundaries, it's not hard to set a boundary. It's actually quite easy to set a boundary. What's hard is enforcing it. Because the moment you set that boundary, they're going to go, oh, there's a boundary here. How do I get over it or under it or beside it? Right? And so for us, we have to move it up. We have to move it down. We have to move it to continue to enforce that boundary. Because we teach people how to treat us. And so if we've taught them, hey, you have to ask 7 times at least before you get what you want, the next time they come, they know that when they hit that 7th threshold and you haven't said yes, they're like, oh, 7 more. Here we go. So we're teaching them. We're spinning the carousel one more time for them to come back and ask us some more. So when we're looking at boundaries and when I'm working with the families, one of the things I talk to them is keeping their eyes on the big picture, because they're looking at their situation like this. And they can't see how boundaries or how working with their son or daughter, taking the credit card away from them, they can't see how that's going to help them. They can't see how that's going to help them, let alone their kids. And so they're looking at it like this, or myopically looking at the situation. And so what we have to do is help them take a step back and see. So if I look at it like this, all I see is this paper. I see 2 people over here, right? And I see a little bit of the board. If I move it right around here, I see 3 people over here now. I see this a little bit better. Right? If I bring it down, now I can see the sign, I I can see the rest of the whiteboard, I can see everything else. And that's one of the things, helping families understand that they gotta take a step back, helps them give them a better idea, better view of what's going on in their situation, in their dynamic. And so, 3 things for the big picture. Get us out of the subjective feelings that everything is bad, right? And so again, when the families come in, it's doom and gloom most of the time, and rightfully so if they're suicidal. I mean, I understand that. But taking a step back and helping them understand that, hey, giving them everything that they want right now, or hovering over them, you know, sleeping with them in their room, not giving them a break, that's really not helping. That's actually creating a more toxic situation, you know, in your home. Changes the moves that you make in the moment. So it helps you. Alright? So learn the lessons of the present, right? So it helps you understand what's going on in that moment. Because if 6 weeks from now, or 8 weeks from now, or 6 months from now, you're still doing the same thing that you were doing then there's no lesson learned. It's the exact same thing. And at that point, we have to figure out at some point, okay, so is this something that is a character flaw of mine? Or is this a bad situation? A lot of times we look at it and say, this is a really bad situation, and you know, kind of that woe is me. But we forget that we have to look at ourselves, or we have to look at the person and say, okay, so what are some of the decisions that you're making that's creating this for the dynamic? Do we need to take a step back and look at this, you know, from more of a bird's eye view? So why am I where I am? So we teach people how to treat us. Results talk to us and look for patterns. A problem is not a problem until we realize it's a problem, and what is my part in this? And so we teach people how to treat us. It's very, very important. Because if, you know, when I talk to the parents and we're talking about their son or daughter, and they're saying, we work with adults, so when I say son or daughter, I'm talking about 18 and above. Some of them are, you know, 35, 40-year-old kids still living in the basement. You know, parents are funding their issues or their some other problems. And so the parents have taught them that, right? So if you tell me that you're going to hurt yourself, or you tell me that you're depressed, okay, we're going to do whatever you want, you know, moving forward, to make sure that you're not depressed anymore, to make sure that you're not anxious, to make sure that you don't hurt yourself. And so what that does is it completely, again, another spin on the carousel. It starts it over again. And so taking a look at why you're there, what are the things that you've done, and how did it get you there? And so when I look at this, I like to think of a relationship autopsy. I don't know if you've ever heard that term or not. But a relationship autopsy is when you look at how did me and this person get to where we're at now, right? So you go back and you look at the relationship and you say, okay, so where did it go this way? Where did it go that way? Where did it go here? How did it go there? What decisions did I make in this moment that caused it to go here? So you create an autopsy of that relationship. And so when I get clients that have come to me and they say, you know, I want to get married, or I've been trying to date, and you know, I just can't find somebody, you know, and I start talking to them, and they're like, well, you know, I have dated, I've had, you know, 6 boyfriends in the last 4 months. Okay, so let's talk about that. You know, what's going on? Like, tell me how the relationship started. Tell me how it progressed. And so you take that same concept and you look at the relationship with somebody struggling with an addiction, somebody struggling with depression or anxiety. What is your role in that? So what's going on? So typically, talking to the parents. Okay, so let's talk about the depression. What happens when they're depressed? So a story comes to mind of a client that we had, and what was going on was she had some history of suicidal ideation, had never attempted, but had cut on herself. And whenever she would tell her parents, you know, I'm having these thoughts, I'm kind of depressed, I'm struggling, her parents, so mom and dad and brother, would then stay in the room with her and they'd take shifts. So shifts all day, every day. So, you know, dad would call him to work, mom would go to work, and they would switch. Mom would call into work, and dad would stay. So they were there all the time. And so when I was talking to the client, I asked him, I said, well, how do you feel about that? I'm like, well, what is your thought on that? And what she told me was, it makes me feel more sick. It makes me feel more sick than I am. And so we have to look at that relationship and see and help them understand. So in that case, it's helping the parents understand, like, okay, so I know it's scary, I know it's difficult, I know that, suicidal ideations is a real serious thing. It's no joke. But the client also needs her space. We gotta take a step back and let the client breathe a little bit so they can have their own thoughts and they can process through those own thoughts. And so what typically that I see in situations like that is that parents don't want the identified client to feel that pain or to have those thoughts. And so if they're in there with them, then they kind of feel like, okay, we're actually doing something to help them. But that's a parent's own anxiety that's creating this. And so one thing that we know about anxiety is that anxiety gives us this false perception that we're actually doing something to help that situation out. Right, so anxiety ramps up, and that energy and our thoughts ruminating and everything going through, our brain says, oh yeah, I'm actually doing something to help this person. I'm actually doing something to help them get healthier, when it's really not. So a problem is not a problem until we realize it's a problem. That's a really difficult one, working with the families, because of the dynamic. This is how they've always done it. Every family has their dance. And so a lot of times the families look at it and they say, well, you're telling me that this isn't working, but, he or she's still alive. And you're telling me, he or she isn't working, but I remember how he or she was. And that's what we want to get back to. And during that time, here's what we were doing. And so helping them understand, and again, it's not us saying, here's your problem, but it's talking it through with the client to help them understand, help them identify, help them define what that problem is. That's when you notice change. That's when change happens. So the two sides of why. So I know when I was going through my master's program, why was a bad word. You can't use it, you can't say it, you're not supposed to, it's combative, it's da-da-da-da-da. I don't really believe that. Being in practice, I don't believe that the question why is necessarily a bad question, asking why. I do think that, you think about little kids when they're growing up, right? And when they're learning and when they're most inventive. They talk about a toddler, most toddlers by the age of 2 to 3 years old have like genius status. Like, because they're learning so much and so fast, right? And this is a question that they ask all the time, right? And I have a 2.5-year-old, so I know this. I'm not saying I always do it right, I'm just saying I know this. And so what happens is the parents get frustrated, right? The daycare provider gets frustrated and starts grooming the kid to think that why is actually a bad thing. Asking why is not a positive thing. And so as we move on through life, we already have that negative connotation. So if we stay on this side of why, is why did this happen to me? Why can I get what they get? Why is it that I'm here now? Why is it that I always fail? Why? So we have this side of why that creates a victimhood, that creates as well as me, that creates a situation that makes us feel hopeless and helpless. But we have this side of why, where if we look at a time, and we can help them look at a time when there was some positives going on, or they were functioning in life, and say, okay, why were you functioning during that time? Why was everything so good during that time? Now we're getting to the other side of why, and we're creating some action steps. We're creating a plan to say, okay, let's start doing these things. Let's look at that. And some of them may not work. They might have tried them already. But it gives you a roadmap to why it worked during that time. Gives you a better idea, gives you more ammunition to help them and help them understand, like, hey, there's been some positive here before, right? The family dynamic has been healthy at some point. What was going on during that time? Why was it healthy during that time? Well, we were having dinner together, or, you know, we're making sure and spending time together, or, you know, that's when I work, you know, 8 to 5, and then I have my own business, and I have my own business, and I work 80 hours a week. Okay, well, let's go look at that. So, you know, do we need to set some parameters on the work schedule? Do we need to do something different? And so that's why this set of why is very, very important. On the left side of why, with the hopelessness and the helplessness, there's also something else, these two other things that are really, really growing on the left side, is guilt and shame. Can somebody tell me the difference with those two?
I did bad, I am bad.
Yep, that's exactly right. Which one's which?
Guilt is I did bad, shame is I am bad.
Yep, that's exactly right. And so guilt is saying, man, I made a bad decision. That wasn't the best decision I could have made. Shame is, why am I so dumb? Why do I always do this? It's always on me. And if you look at, on the training, it talked about Terry Bradshaw's book. And I'm a big fan of where he breaks this down. And he talks about there being positive guilt and negative guilt, positive shame and negative shame. We won't get into that today because we'll need a lot longer to do that. But it is very important to be able to differentiate that. And so what the research says is by the time a child is 5, you can see if they lean towards guilt talk or shame talk in their sentence structures. And so we're talking, if somebody comes to us at 25, we're talking about 20 years of conditioning of this shame talk that I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or I'm a screw up. It's a long time.
Don't you think, not just, they're coming to you for therapy because the adult child has an issue, and parents, it sounds like in a lot of cases you're referring to, are enabling it. So there's a lot of education that has to go on. Do you find it difficult to have the adult child sign releases of information that you can openly discuss what's happening and what they're reporting in therapy to their parents?
So with the group, it's a part of it. It's a requirement that they sign releases for their parents. And so if they're living with them,
Really?
it's a requirement. Now, if they're not living with them, then it's a requirement for the wife or the husband. Yep. Because sometimes the wife is an enabler or the husband's an enabler. And so during group, part of it is family counseling. And so I work with the family. So I work with the husband or wife healing in their relationship. So it's a part of it. So
Well, that just surprises me because I never worked with anyone that was going to really say anything to anybody, but I was purely on the criminal justice side of things.
We do that with our probation clients too. They don't have a choice but to sign a consent to their PO because they're referred by probation.
Well, yeah, that, but not the family, not the parents.
So part of our program, it's ingrained to do work with the families. So we also do an in-home assessment. So we go and we talk to the family dynamic and kind of see where they've been and where they're at and where they want to go. And we create a plan to then work with the families for the next 6 weeks to help them create a healthier place at home.
I was gonna say, I work in a mental hospital, we do that. We have them sign releases when they get there. We always ask, is there anybody that you want us to call about your treatment while you're here? And they'll usually say their mom or their wife or their husband, and then they sign a release of information, and then we call them and ask, you know, what led up to them being here, what do we need to do for them while they're here, and where do we need to discharge them to? And so we do a collateral call with each person that comes in. Some people have no one, and some people don't want to release the family, or if they've been there a lot of times, we already know those people, so they're like, you don't have to call them this time, they know.
Yeah, and so, and from what I've seen is if you get it up front, then it's typically not an issue. If you try to come back later, then you can have some resistance. But again, it's part of the program. That's how it's designed, is to help that family nucleus.
I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. Like fangirl fan of Brene Brown, and she does a lot of stuff on guilt and shame and has a lot of great books. If anyway, we're doing shame, so, there you go.
Yeah, she's fantastic. She is fantastic. So, looking at guilt, so unresolved guilt is like having a snooze alarm in your head that won't shut off. So it just keeps going over and over and over. Guilty feelings make it difficult to think straight. So your filter is no longer clear, it's cluttered when there's guilt that's present. Guilt makes us reluctant to enjoy life. So we think about like survivor's guilt, you know, and if we look at families, I've talked to families and they've, you know, I said, so what are you guys doing for Christmas? Oh, we're just gonna stay home. Okay, well, do you guys have family in town? Well, yeah, everybody's getting together at, you know, my cousin's house or my sister's house. Well, why aren't you guys going? Well, you know, Billy's sick right now, and so, you know, none of us can have a good time. It's basically what they're telling me. None of us can have a good time. And that's that guilt, reluctant to enjoy life. You know, we have to feel bad because Billy's not feeling good. You can make yourself self-punished. So that's a part of that. We're going to go ahead and self-punish ourselves, and we're not going to enjoy the holidays, and we're not going to enjoy some of the victories in our lives because little Billy isn't doing well. So because of that, we're going to go ahead and punish ourselves. Guilt-prone people assume they've harmed others when they haven't. So that goes back to that I made a bad decision, right? And so looking at that is really understanding, taking a step back, and it's setting those boundaries again, right? What are you responsible for? There's two sides of responsibility. Guilt feelings make you feel literally heavier and more belabored. So as part of our group, we've done trauma-focused yoga. And one of the things, this didn't really come to life, and I didn't really understand that until we started having it more consistently. And the client started telling us, you know, like, I didn't know that my body was so tense. Like, I had no idea that I was carrying, you know, the trauma, that the heaviness that I felt in my chest, and, you know, in my shoulders, that heaviness that I felt, that's from the trauma 10 years ago, 12 years ago, 5 years ago. They had no idea. So shame. Shame is critical self-awareness, self-blame, unrelenting high standards, worried about always pleasing others, having to be perfect. So whenever I talk to people about high standards, I always get the question, well, shouldn't we have high standards? Well, shouldn't we strive, you know, to do our best? Yes, 100% yes. But unrelenting high standards is when you say, hey, here's the target. Oh, you almost got it. Here's the target. Oh, you almost got that. All right, the target's over here. That's where unrelenting high standards comes in, where there's a level of self-sabotage that doesn't matter how close you get to your target, you're going to move it anyways. That's unrelenting high standards. That's not healthy. One of the things that I see with shame is these people will come in, and here is where, let's say, success is. There's this line right here where there's success, and then there's this line down here that's failure, and they work overtime to stay mediocre. So they're working, and as soon as you're going to have a breakthrough or have something positive, they self-sabotage and they come down, but then they go, well, yeah, I can't fall below here because then, you know, I'm going to be a loser, or I'm going to be not good enough. So then they start working again, they work, so they work overtime to stay mediocre, and they create this cycle. And that's part of that unrelenting high standards, is part of that perfectionism. We also see people that, you know, have like perfectionistic procrastination. And so, you know, they get anxious, and then they end up self-sabotaging themselves because they're perfectionists, but now they're past the deadline, or now, you know, it's too close, so they end up sabotaging themselves. And again, that carousel just puts another spin on it. You spin again in the carousel.
I've heard people say that they think a lot of people with addiction are shame-based. Do you agree with that?
I've never met somebody struggling with addiction that doesn't have a hurt from the heart. I've never met anyone. And, you know, when you look at traumas, you look at, you know, big T, you look at little t, and I've never met somebody that once we go back and really dig deep, don't have a time. I'll give you a quick story. I was talking to a client one time, and we're kind of processing through this, and this client had been just in and out of different places, had like a desperation to get better. And as we're kind of talking and doing a timeline, and we're looking at, okay, what's going on, and Cheryl, our group therapist, did a genogram, so we're looking at this stuff. He sat there and he said, he says, I don't know why, but this is coming up. And we're like, okay. He said, when I was 5, he says, I'm ADD, I've got a lot of energy. He said, my dad was really strict. And so when we sat at the dinner table, me and my brother and my sister were just supposed to be quiet. We weren't supposed to be heard. My dad was quiet, he had his dinner, and we knew that we could get off the table once he got up, and he walked away. So that was our cue that, okay, now we can leave. And he said, and that day, he said, I was sitting there and I was going to tell my dad something, and as soon as I opened my mouth, he said, my dad hit me. He said, he hit me so hard that I flew off the chair. And so, as we started really digging into that and looking at, okay, well, what is this? Why is this even here? That completely changed the way that he looked at himself. It completely changed the way that he reacted to people and the way he interacted. So what was interesting is that when he was 5, from 5 till about 12, his form of isolation was video games. From about 12 and a half to 13, till I met him, his form of isolation was alcohol. So both things did the same thing. They numbed, right? He didn't feel at that moment. And when I asked him, I said, well, tell me, why? Why were you doing this? And he said, what, it's easier to do life when you're numb. And so again, there's a hurt from the heart, in my opinion. I've never met somebody that's struggling with an addiction that doesn't have a hurt from the heart. So I hope that answers your question.
5-minute warning.
5-minute warning, perfect. Perfect. So signs we have not forgiven. So one of the things that I truly believe, in order for us to be able to help our clients heal, and this is clients that are struggling with addiction, clients that are struggling with suicidal ideations, with anxiety, is helping them figure out who they have to forgive. And about 90% of the time, it starts with them forgiving themselves, and then being able to forgive whoever that person is that has hurt them. And so, signs that we have not forgiven are excessive blaming, bottled up emotion, isolation from others, poor self-care, no longer finds activities pleasurable, chronic fatigue, loss of appetite, anxiety, and depression. So I like to think about depression and anxiety. When I think about it, when I think about our brains, I think about our cell phones. And so our cell phones have certain gigabytes of memory. And we know that once they get full, the apps start closing, the internet gets slower, we start dropping calls, or we don't get text messages. That's the same thing that happens with our brain. When we carry these traumas around, when we carry these things in our backpack, we stop functioning the way we're supposed to. We stop connecting with people. We start dropping the ball at work or with our family or our friends. We start isolating. We don't function where we need to be. And so helping the clients or the families understand that, because the families are typically the ones that, again, are on 24/7, trying to help the identified client. Now, I'm not saying that, okay, so they just have to stop helping them and they recharge. What I'm saying is changing the way that they help them, because what they've been doing hasn't been working. So it's really looking at doing something different. So who here likes control? All right. So everybody else, because here's the deal. Our brain wants to be in control 100% of the time. Every single moment, it wants to be in control. And so if you have these overwhelming emotions and you drink or you do drugs, right? The client told me it's easier to do life under the influence, numb. So that gives you back a sense of control. right? So I was saying earlier that we work with chronically suicidal clients. And one of the things that I started noticing, and this isn't like in the literature, but everyone that I talk to, having suicidal ideations is at one more level of control. It's in my control. So I can choose to do it or I can choose not to. And so from that, what I've learned is that, and I don't want to minimize suicidal ideations, but I think there's like a difference. I don't want to live like this anymore, right? And if I have to live like this, then I want to kill myself. So this one, there's like a sense of hope still there. I don't want to live like this, which implies if I can do something different, if I can get some relief here, then I think I can move forward. And then there's this one that says I want to kill myself. So this one needs a way higher level of care. This one needs a lot more attention, needs more investment, more time and energy to help them not jump to this. But it's that level of control. It's them saying, I want some control back in this. I feel like my life is out of control. I feel like emotionally I'm out of control and I need it back. So, forgiveness steps. State who you need to forgive and for what. Step 2, acknowledge how you currently feel about the situation. This one is a big one because most people, when it's been several years, are numb. Or they're completely triggered where they can't even handle those emotions. So it's really important to know how are you feeling right now, because if it's a real trigger spot, then we know it's a hot spot. And we know that, hey, once we open this, we need to keep it open to keep working on it. We can't just close it or leave it till later. We gotta keep going. If they're numb, then what we have to do is give them the skills, and both, we have to give them the skills on how to deal with the emotions that are coming. So before opening up that can of worm, if they're numb, it's really giving them the skills that they need for when those emotions come up, they're prepared. They're ready to be able to deal with them. Step 3, state the benefits you will get from forgiving. So the essence of influence is agreement. Let me say that again. The essence of influence is agreement. I wish that I came up with that, but I didn't. That was Andy Andrews that came up with it. But it makes sense, because if you can help them understand, if you guys can agree on how forgiving somebody is going to change them, it's going to help them get to a healthier spot, you've now influenced them. And so when you think about the way we develop, at some point, we break away from our parents and we get influenced by our peers, by the people around us. And as we get older, that peer group continues to influence us. And so if we can figure out what we agree on, you cannot influence the person that you're working with. So commit yourself to forgiving. Forgiveness has 2 concepts to it. There's a level of grace, so being graceful and saying, I'm going to go ahead and forgive you. And there's a level of mercy. And being merciful is a difficult one. Because we can be graceful and walk away and be like, I hope they get hit by a bus. Right? That's not being merciful. But that's something in us. And so committing to forgiving, it takes work. It takes practice. And it takes time doing it over and over again. Any questions? We'll be respectful of